Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us today. Welcome to Business and Life Insights. And today I have the pleasure to admit a good friend of mine, Bill Edwards, an expert in the international realm. He's been taking US-based companies to other countries for 50 plus years. William or Bill Edwards is CEO and Global Business Advisor for Edwards Global Services Incorporated. He uses his 5 decades of international operations, international startups, executive consulting, and entrepreneurial experience to help executives successfully take their businesses into new countries. Bill has lived in 5 countries, plus Alaska, and worked on projects in more than 50 countries around the world, helping 40 plus Fortune 50 and Inc. 5000 and private companies across 12 business sectors successfully enter more than 30 countries. He's currently the chairman of the District Export Council of Southern California and is an international trade advisor to both the U.S. Secretary of Commerce and to the U.S. Trade Representative. Bill's company has twice received the U.S. President's Award for Export Excellence. He has published over 60 articles on global business development and publishes a bi-weekly Global Business Update newsletter that is read by 4,500 plus subscribers in 20 countries. He has published the well-known Global View 40 country ranking chart quarterly since 2001. Welcome, Bill. It's such a pleasure to have you on the show today. I'm so glad that you're able to take some time out of your very busy schedule to join us and update us on the impacts of the latest election on international business. And I know we were talking a little earlier, things change quickly now, and you are giving us the latest. So welcome, and thank you for joining.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here.
You've written a bi-weekly newsletter, and you have now your 121st newsletter now published for people to read. And one of your top articles entitled Elections Have Consequences. Could you elaborate on that for us?
Well, elections do have consequences, and we found that out about almost 2 weeks ago. It seems like it was a month ago, but it was only less than 2 weeks ago. This year, there are 71 countries that are having national elections, and when they have elections, things change. And so we've got to take a look at what's going on in order to do international business. We are going to focus on U.S., but these elections are going to change a lot of things around the world. Now, my comments are not political. I don't do politics. I just want to figure out what the best way to do business is. It's becoming clear that the surprise result of our election will significantly impact the way we and people in other countries do business going forward, not just the U.S., but around the world. That 71 national elections in this year, by the way, the largest number ever in recorded history in 1 year, covered over 50% of the world's population and almost 55% of the world's economy. Gross domestic product. And now businesses around the world, as we come to the end of the year, are trying to figure out what the new political and economic environment is going to be. And so, of course, are we doing that here? It's interesting. The Financial Times newspaper reported that most ruling parties in the countries that had national elections lost a share of the control of their votes in their country this year. Well, that certainly happened here. And we want to take a look at what examples are of impacts that elections can have. Regulations can go or come. Currency changes can make it more easy to get, easier to get paid from foreign countries, or more difficult. We are going to talk about tariffs, and certainly tariffs in both directions make a massive difference in doing business. And then we have fluctuating labor costs, which are all over the world. I'm going to keep on going. I saw an article today that was very interesting. The CEO of Citicorp said that she believes now that the election is over in this country, that mergers and acquisitions will begin to pick up again. During the last year or so, a lot of places in the world held off making investments, mergers, and acquisitions because they didn't really know what was going to be the basis for doing business this year. And we certainly found out last week that can change. She also believes that tight capital restrictions are going to be eased and that companies will adjust to a changed business environment.
All
Did
right.
you want to go to the next question?
Oh, yes.
Keep talking?
No, you're a wealth of information, Bill. You could keep talking if it seems like it would be a nice follow-on. But I just was going to ask you another question to kind of add to what you've said already. And then, so there have been national elections in 71 countries in 2024. And what does this mean for doing business in other countries in 2024?
Well, as I said, we've got to take a look at what the change of regimes in some cases and whether it's going to be, as I said, more or less regulation. Are the taxes going to be different? Are foreign companies going to be let in easier or more difficult? And of course, the bottom line is with 71 countries around the world, it's going to be very different from place to place.
Sure, sure. Yes, and can you talk a little bit more about how countries might experience what's going on differently in locally for themselves and maybe as they interact with other countries?
Put on by this country, they get put on by other countries in reply. And one of the things I've found over the last year plus is that people in other countries and in this country have been hesitant to make new investments. There was just a lot of uncertainty. Now we know in these 71 countries what's going to be the playing field. We don't quite know everything in this country yet because we don't know what the new regime, what surprises may be right around the corner for us with this regime, but there will be changes. And one of the questions I had, if I could go on, are
Sure.
Why are the elections in the U.S. so important to the rest of the world? Well, we are the largest economy in the world. So what happens here has an impact in Asia, Latin America, Europe, and the Middle East. You're going to see countries in Latin America and the Middle East. It'll be a little easier to do business. Perhaps in the European Union and certainly in China, it's going to be more difficult for us to do business. Everybody wants to sell into our market because we're the biggest in the world. But I think they're going to be seeing some increased barriers to entry, the tariffs and some other things. President-elect Trump is set to disrupt transatlantic regulations, escalate trade tensions. We can already limited cooperation on climate and tech policy and strain European Union on defense and probably on Ukraine. The key is to figure out what the impact of doing business in the European Union countries are going to be, especially if things turn bad with Ukraine, because Ukraine has a big impact on the countries nearby in Europe. And it all depends on the president's foreign policy after January 20th. We don't really know what's going to happen right now. We do know that political stability is going to change substantially in countries as the administration targets tariffs and sanctions. We can expect sanctions to come back, and we definitely can expect tariffs of some level. When we put a tariff up, somebody else puts one up in return, and everybody ends up paying more.
Right. Just to kind of back up a little bit, can you explain to us how tariffs?
I am not an economist. I'm not a specialist. But basically, if a company or in another country is selling a product into this country, let's say they're selling Mercedes and BMWs that are made in other countries, not here. What happens with a tariff is that the price of importing that car goes up by a certain amount, whatever the tariff is, whether it's 10%, 20, whatever. And so the price of the car goes up because it gets passed on to the consumer. And theoretically, that means that we should not go for the more expensive imported car, but go for the supposedly less expensive local car. Doesn't usually work out quite that way. But it's not only cars, it's anything you can think of coming in. If it has for example, some countries have tariffs coming in. Some products and services have tariffs coming here, some don't. The president-to-be seems to want to put tariffs on everything, and that's going to increase inflation, but it's also going to theoretically cause our consumers here to buy local as opposed to imported. That remains to be seen.
Right. So I guess a country that we can point to where this might be having a very big effect is China. So there's 60% tariff on Chinese imported goods, correct?
60% is what he says. It's going to be high. I'm not convinced that he's going to get that much, but it's going to be high. That's primarily on cars, because he doesn't want the electric, the EVs coming in from China. But it really will be on a lot of different things. And we certainly do not have a positive balance of payments with China. You'll see a lot more companies moving their factories and manufacturing facilities to other countries away from China that don't have this problem.
Right. And one I've heard is a potential Chinese manufacturing moving its facilities to Mexico, as a case in point.
That's called nearshoring, bringing it close by. And we know all about that. And so the president says that isn't going to work. We have a trade agreement with Mexico and Canada, the USMCA, U.S.-Mexico-Canadian agreement, but that doesn't really cover Chinese companies' products that are produced in Mexico. And so that the low tariff from that agreement, which is the new NAFTA, will not apply. I mean, we will not allow that to happen. So the Chinese can move all their manufacturing to Mexico they want, but guess what? We're kind of watching on that to see who's doing what. Yeah.
So it's an entrepreneur, and it's just being watched carefully. So
very carefully. Yes.
Yeah, definitely. So that's great. A great piece of information. So if I understand this correctly, so a tariff is actually an increase on imports.
It's like a tax. Yeah. Now it's not paid by the company or the country on the other side. It's paid here. When they bring the product in order to bring it in, they have to pay a tariff up front. And then, of course, that's passed on to consumer. It's not paid by the country or the company on the other end. But theoretically, it causes the company on the other end to lose market share because theoretically, the U.S. equivalent will be cheaper.
So the country importing, or the people who live in the country that is importing a good, is actually paying a higher price, which it dissuades them from actually buying a product, but buying.
Well, theoretically, yes, theoretically, it doesn't really work out too much that way, but it sounds good.
Yeah, it does sound good. So what about manufacturers and people who have inputs that come from other countries?
This is a big problem. A lot of raw materials come into this country for manufacturing. And they will be subject to the tariffs. And if they come from China, which we do import a lot of raw materials from China, they will be affected by that very high tariff. And of course, what will that do? Well, if you're using those raw materials to make something, whatever it is, it's going to increase the cost of that product, whatever you're making. No, there's no free lunch. Somebody has to pay.
No, that's right. And I would think that it'd be difficult for manufacturers to change suppliers. And
extremely. You've hit upon one of the biggest problems in the world of trade. You get a supplier that you've had for years that produces the product you want at the quality you want, the time you want it. To change to another supplier is extraordinarily expensive and time consuming. But people are looking very carefully at that. They've already started that, moving out of China into Vietnam, India, Bangladesh, Vietnam, Mexico. But it's really tough to change suppliers. I was on a webinar this morning with somebody who imports manufactured products from China. And he says, I'm going to have to change suppliers. It'll take 2 or 3 years before I can find one that can do it the right way.
Oh, my gosh. That's
right. Yeah. Oh, yeah. You can't just move offshore and have it done. Now, the good news is people have already begun doing that. They've got an impetus to do it a little faster.
Got it. So is there an opportunity then for other countries or other suppliers to kind of maximize this opportunity for themselves, possibly?
Oh, sir. Like I said, they're moving to places like Vietnam, Indonesia, Bangladesh, India, where the cost of labor is lower and where there are not the high tariffs. Okay. Yeah, they're doing it. Remember what I said, it takes a while to do that, to move your supply chain.
Right. It's very hard to change a process that's been working for so long. And you have relationships too with these companies in other countries, and those relationships get disrupted. Is there something there that would be interesting to point out?
Well, it's an ongoing thing that you have suppliers that you trust, and now you're going to have to change. So it's always going on, though. People are always looking at their suppliers, but now it's going to be an acceleration, I believe.
Right.
And that's going to be costly, but that's what, the number one word in the world of my 50 years of doing international business is flexibility, and being able to adapt and to be very flexible. And this what's happened to us in the last week or so is just a good example of that.
Right. So has there been anything in your experience that parallels what's going on right now that comes to mind?
There have been changes over the years, but I don't think anything quite as strong as this, as different, because we're not out there yet. We're going from a government that is focused on certain things like unions and climate change and that sort of thing to a government that's going to be focused on selling product. Full stop. And that's and then of course, you haven't gotten into, there's a question that we had, what is an example of the impact of the new administration's foreign policy? Yeah. Well, I will predict And of course, what is that good? Because of polls, I would predict
Well, you're the expert
by
in
January 20th, maybe before, a little after, this new administration will reimpose all sanctions on Iran. And what that will do is drop Iran's oil production from about 4 million barrels a day to about 2,
yes.
cutting about $8 or $10 billion a year in income for them, and driving up the cost of oil to China, which imports 40% of its oil from Iran. Now, that is going to disrupt a lot of things. And if the oil price goes up because there's less supply, which it will be, then guess what happens in California with the price of gas? Okay.
Right.
It may just go up.
Yes.
And that's going to happen. You can depend on that. That's one of the things that's going to happen, whether we like it or not, because that has very little to do with business. It has to do with foreign policy.
Right. Yeah. And you just brought up the interconnectivity between countries. So China depends on Iran for its oil to currently at a low cost. And I guess if they produce less, the cost of fuel, petroleum, is going to go up for everyone around the world. So there are mega impacts.
Oh, there is. It's a global impact. And guess where most of the new oil will come from that China has to do contracts for now?
No, why don't you tell us?
Here. We're
Interesting.
exporting oil to China. Small amount, but it will probably go up.
Very interesting. Right. So will that affect the trade deficit in any way?
It will, but if the prices go up, we have to eat that at home here. So but everything is interconnected, Melania. I mean, you can't move one thing and expect the other things not to move.
No, that's right. And I wanted to explore that a little bit because we have become so interdependent around the world, and what impacts one country also impacts its relationships with other countries, and it depends on the industry too.
It does.
Cars, we touched on oil, we touched on
raw materials, and
materials.
food. Food is something that is exported. We're a huge food exporter, this country. But another thing that's going to happen is that there are going to be changing regulations and laws in this country. More than likely, a lot less regulation in business. And so a foreign company, as well as local companies, are going to have to learn to navigate, a patchwork of new rules. And I think that's going to especially happen in telecommunications, software, cloud services, data privacy. I think those areas we're going to see a lot of change in regulation that's going to impact not only us at home, but people in companies in other countries that deal with that, because they have to live with our regulations. And then there's this one little thing called immigration.
Yeah.
Immigration, and I'm not going to deal with the open border challenge because that's political, but we need people to work in this country. And if limits are put on bringing in people illegally, that's going to drive up the cost of doing business. I think that may happen. It may happen because you need a visa if you come in here legally. You need a visa, and if those are limited, it's going to drive up the cost of labor.
Right. So
everything ties together, Melania.
No, that's exactly what I want to point out, because
it's kind of like if you push this, that's going to move. We're looking at an administration that's going to change a lot of things. What they're pushing, it's just going to be different. And if they need to keep in touch with what's going on, try to measure what's going to happen with the policies on this administration. That's going to be interesting. Again, that's not a political statement. It's just a fact. It's going to be very interesting. And then see what the results of those policies are. The sanctions are not really a trade policy. They're a foreign policy, but they have trade implications.
I hadn't thought of it quite like that. So thank you for pointing that out, the trade implications. But so like, when the whole world there was a global pandemic, COVID changed us forever.
It did.
More technologically based, and Trump too administration is going to have some similar far-reaching effects. We're talking about them now. And can you talk us through some of the potential other repercussions or effects or opportunities even that may come out of our next administration?
Well, I think there are going to be a lot of opportunities. I think that we will once we change our foreign policy and our economic policy, we're going to see a lot of opportunities for U.S. business to go into places under terms that they would not have had under the previous administration. The previous administration wasn't focused on trade. They were focused on trying to get other countries to unionize and spend money on climate control, which is fine. but not when you're an emerging country trying to get people to the point where they're in middle class. So especially countries like Indonesia, you're going to see a dramatic change in what we're selling into Indonesia and what our policy is, because the last 4 years, they're really trying to get their people out of poverty. Okay, we should probably try to do that first. And this government will be very much focused on transactions as opposed to policy of changing, the climate change challenge. And I'm not diminishing climate change. It's just, I think there'll be a different focus. And here are the keys to watch. Watch who the Secretary of State is. And then this person called the U.S. Trade Representative, which is the one that sets trade policy that almost nobody knows about, but they're really powerful. So we need to watch who those people are going to be that come in, but what are their policies and what are they going to stress when they're dealing with other countries? So those four people, I know there's other, all the other appointees are important, but for international business, Treasury, which handles money and interest rates, Commerce, which has all the regulations of doing business here and there, State, which is where your foreign policy is implemented. And then this person called the U.S. Trade Representative, who dictates what the policy is going to be in trade and with other countries. We need to watch those four very closely. If I, as an international business person, those are the ones I'm most interested in.
Interesting. Could you elaborate a little bit more about the roles that they each play so that we can have a better sense?
Yeah, Secretary of State is the one that implements whatever the foreign policy is, diplomatic policy of the president. And, if we have things happen in the world, they have a certain way of dealing with it. And that determines how our relationships with the countries. Everybody's worried about China. Those of us who have been around China, I've been around China for 40 years after living there in the 80s. I'm not as worried about that. I think one of the key things that happened, and this is real, and the day after the election, he contacts Donald Trump. That tells you that how the difference in people are and the difference in philosophy and how we're dealing with those people that are not necessarily our best buddies forever. Yes.
Interesting. And then the Trade Secretary of Commerce
Commerce implements the trade policies. So he or she in the country and what we allow to leave the country. We don't allow everything to leave the country because we don't send, certain things that can be used in wars to other countries. That person oversees the Department of Commerce that has a lot of activity here, but internationally, what's going to be allowed to go out. I will say that I've been through probably a dozen secretaries of commerce, and the one we have now is probably one of the best ever, Secretary Raimondo. She was a private equity investment banker, and she understands business. And so what we need is to get those sort of people that understand business in these positions. Now that's not a political statement. That's just my feeling that if they understand business, they might understand how we can do better selling our products overseas.
Yeah, seems reasonable. Yes, exactly.
Well, but it all depends on who gets the job, Melania. Who's going to get the jobs, okay?
Right. Yeah, understood. Then we have the Secretary of Treasury.
Well, Secretary of Treasury works on setting financial policy, trying to work with other countries on cross-border policy. Very, very important. Other than signing the dollar bills, it's really important what they do. But again, they're following the policy of the president. Remember that. So we start with the president, whoever that is, and then he or she says, do this, and then they do that. They implement what the policy is. But I like to see strong people in those positions because strong people get paid attention to overseas, to put it bluntly.
Oh, well,
okay.
That probably stands to reason. And they're not appointed positions, are they?
Oh, they are. Oh, absolutely.
They are. Okay.
Oh, yes.
And the Secretary of State is
appointed positions. That's what I'm saying is that the president-to-be will decide who those people are, and that tells you a lot about how things are going to be. But we only have one of those four so far.
Right.
And that's the Secretary of State. We're close to the U.S. Trade Representative being announced. They're appointed by the president. No, that's right.
All right, good. That's good to be clear on that. So then you mentioned the Secretary of Trade. So I think that's the last.
Well, it's called the U.S. Trade Representative, USTR. And that person is appointed also. It's the equivalent of a secretary, and they implement the trade policy. The current administration was not interested in making trade free trade agreements. So that person was focused on other things. The new administration will probably not make free trade agreements, but they may do agreements that have to do with trade. We need to do one of those with the European Union, with the UK, that we don't have in place. And that was not going to happen in the current administration. That's just their policy. Not a political statement, it was their policy. We had a very strong U.S. Trade Representative, Secretary Tai. She's very strong, but she implemented President Biden's policy. That's what she did. Okay, and the new one will be implementing different policies.
Yeah, different policies. And you work with the trade.
I'm an advisor to the Secretary of Commerce and Trade. Well, if we go to use an example, that the current Secretary of Commerce, Secretary Raimondo,
great.
She has been involved heavily in she has several 100,000 employees under her, but one of her groups is a customs area where they decide what electronic, products we will be allowed to export to other countries. We don't like to export things that can be used in war. Let's put it bluntly, okay? And what you can or cannot import also, by the way. And so that one of the functions of Department of Commerce is to determine what those are and to those exports and imports. Very big job.
I would think so. So we're going to come back to that because there's just so much here that I want to be able to cover what we wanted to cover through the questions that I have here that we've listed that I have prior. So the United States, you mentioned, is the largest economy in the world.
Yes.
What percentage of the total gross domestic product of the U.S. is exported to other countries?
Well, the U.S. annual economy is about $6 trillion. Lots of zeros.
Yes, huge.
We import about 3.8 trillion and we export about 2.5 trillion. So we have a deficit of about 1.3 trillion to our exports. It's very interesting. The United States exports 12% of what we create.
Oh.
Mexico exports 40%, Germany 47%. Brazil, 15%, China, 37%. So you look at the Germanys and the Mexicos and the China, a huge percentage of their economy is exported, not ours. We're very small, 12%, because we have such a big consumer market that, we've got plenty of people to sell it to here. Now, that's usually more exports is usually good, but let's take an example. Let's see an example that's happening right now. Germany exports 47% of everything they produce. Sounds like a really good idea, good balance of payment. Well, guess what's just happened? The Chinese are going to stop the import of foreign cars.
Wow.
And of the 47% of Germany's manufacturing that exported, probably a third of that is exported into China. And that's going to be stopping. And as a result, Volkswagen announced last week that they're going to close plants in Germany for the first time in their history because there's not a requirement anymore. So that exporting's good until you're too dependent on exporting.
Yes, I guess so. Yes, especially when to other countries over which
you have absolutely no control. Very good point.
Yeah, so it's a big vulnerability. Lesson learned. Have to readjust, but they're closing their factories.
Three auto plants for the first time in their, I think it's 80-year history.
80.
I could be wrong.
Oh, yeah. Well,
yeah, and you can imagine how many jobs that is. That's going to be poof.
Yeah, the impact. So the secondary effects of that, people out of work, getting retooled to try to work for other companies. One
thing I tell people about international business, it's never boring. It's very often challenging, but it is never boring. There's always going to be something that happens every day.
Yes, there's so many moving parts and so many elements.
There are an infinite number of moving parts.
Yes, and that's why you've been at this for 50 plus years.
I love it. I love doing it. I love exporting U.S. brands to other countries and our way of doing business. But
yes,
it's when you try to take a restaurant brand into a country to get import food into countries is very difficult. They don't want other food coming in. They want you to use their own. And so they put the tariffs up, way up high and that sort of thing. So you have to figure out a way around that. And so, like I said, it's never boring. No, never. So let's backtrack a little bit. We just jumped right into the elections, but let's learn more about you, Bill. So you've been helping U.S. companies because you've been in this space for so long. It's second nature to you, having lived in 7 countries yourself, and include Alaska. Plus Alaska, yeah. Yes, plus Alaska. It's not contiguous with the U.S., with the rest of the U.S. Not a country, but yeah. But tell us how you got started working. Well, it's very interesting. I'm the first person in my family to ever have a passport of any generation.
Oh,
And I started life as an oil exploration engineer working for ARCO Atlantic Richfield. I started working in Texas and California, exploring for oil. And then I was asked if I'd like to do an international assignment. And so the first international assignment my wife and I, with no kids, had was Indonesia in the 70s. And we got hooked. We just really liked living in other countries. And so we went on there to 6 more countries in Asia and Middle East and Europe. And my goal all along has been to export American brands because we have the best business systems in the world. That's how we can compete. That's why we can compete against each other in the world, because we have great process-focused businesses. Not every country has that, by the way. So when I take a restaurant brand like a Denny's or a Carl's or a Dairy Queen into a new country, they bring a business that's already defined and proven in a process and manuals and systems to make the business work. But you know what else they do? When we opened our first Denny's in Manila, we had 1,000 applicants to become employees, and we needed about 150. And why would that be? Because American companies internationally have good jobs, well paid, good benefits, and lots of training. So what we're doing, and I'm going to get evangelical here because I believe in this, we're creating middle class in other countries by giving them better jobs.
yeah.
And I'm a huge believer in that, and that's one of the good things we do. Now, I know there are a lot of things we do that are less good. That's one of the good things we do. So that ended up 5 decades. I not really know where that all went, but here we are.
Well, you have a rich background, so all this cultural exposure that you've had over the years too, it must have helped shape your mindset as well.
I have my secret to doing business internationally is that I love and appreciate other cultures. It's very simple. And people know that when you talk to them, they know that.
Yeah.
And I really do appreciate other cultures.
Yes, you do.
Not all of them are easy to work with. They all have value. And I learned that by living in other countries, not just flying in to do consulting work, but actually living in a country is very different than doing business periodically.
Right. So, and you've developed relationships, personal relationships, I'm sure, in many countries. And
I'll give you a personal, this one's kind of tough. My wife passed away several years ago, and we had lived in Turkey for 2 years. I started up ARCO's operations and division there. We had a fabulous time there. We met so many people. My daughters still have friends there. When Nancy passed away, I got letters from friends there.
oh, that's so sweet.
How do you match that? And
No, life.
I'm sorry to give you that kind of example. That's probably not what you asked for, but
no,
I'm just a huge believer in what would the world be like if we were all the same? I guess we'd be automatons.
Yeah,
or robots, and
maybe not.
Now keeping track of the cultures and working with them, that's a different story. I don't want you to think that's easy. Okay, it is not easy.
But yes, you can't not develop relationships when you're living in a place.
Yep.
It just goes with that. It's a life experience for sure. And I'm just thinking now too, wouldn't it be great if all of us could have the similar experience in the world that you've had many times over?
Well, Americans are good at traveling, and Americans appreciate other cultures, and some don't. There used to be the ugly American way back when. I'm sure there's still some of those, but we get exposed to cultures because we travel so much, for vacation, which is good.
Yeah, very good. You have some great memories, I can tell. Thank you for sharing that personal story, Bill. It does touch us. It makes the point that around the world, we're all human.
Yes, we are.
Aren't we? Yeah, we're all human.
Yep. And that's a plus and a minus, by the way.
Yeah, it's the way that makes the world go round. So just to kind of backtrack a little bit, there's a point here that we didn't touch on that I want to come back to, and that's Bitcoin.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, very dramatic change there. Could you comment on what?
Yeah, Bitcoin has gone up, as of yesterday, 30% over what it was on November 4th.
Wow.
Now, why would that be? Well, I'm not a Bitcoin. I'm scared to invest in that. Some investors believe the incoming administration is going to ease controls on cryptocurrency. And in fact, I read somewhere that they may want to establish a national Bitcoin reserve and position U.S. as crypto capital. That's a little, and I don't know anything about that, but of course that leads investors that are in that to bring up the price. That's another one of those things we really don't, in millennia, we really don't know what's going to happen. It's too early, but it's going to change. I think the thing I'd like to get across today is things are going to change.
Yes. No, that's so.
We cannot go on the way we were before November 5th. It's just a fact.
Yeah.
It's not
So
a political statement, it's a fact. And if you want to continue to do business, you better admit that and adjust.
right. So the reason why it went up in value is because it was acceptable. It is becoming more acceptable. Maybe it was even given credibility by.
I think it was given credibility. I have no idea how acceptable it is because that's something I could never understand. That's too sophisticated for me. But investors think it's going to be better. So, it's kind of like the stock market. If you think things are going to be better, it's going to go up. If you think they're not, it's going to go down.
No, and one
Pretty
of
simple.
very simple, yes. You get the it holds it has trust that's embedded into it once it's been kind of acknowledged and given credibility. But I understand that, and this is kind of a side note, that any cryptocurrency is in some developing countries more acceptable than their own domestic currency because it can be traded in other countries. And if they cannot afford the US dollar, the next best bet is a cryptocurrency. So that's for developing countries and to enhance their own ability to trade across borders and buy things and sell things across borders in countries that don't have a very strong currency. That's my understanding. So I'll just
Well, we'll see how that works.
yeah, we'll see how that works. See if that theory holds water.
Yep.
Can you also now give us an example?
Some people say the new president speaks loudly and carries a big stick. And some of the strange players will be more worried about what he might do. I don't know if that's going to be the case or not. I can only tell you about that call from President Xi, which is really, I think,
Very telling.
important. I think it's telling. Yeah.
Yes.
Of course, they know this guy from before. He's been around. This is not his first rodeo. Okay.
No,
And
no.
so what they will have to see what that means.
Yes, exactly. And so what does he think about the 60% tariff?
He's the one putting it on. So no, 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 no. Oh, no, no, no. I'm sure President Xi's not overly excited about that.
No.
Yeah, that would be the understatement of the decade, probably.
Yeah. But maybe he feels, I don't know. So tariffs can be negotiated too. They can be
Oh, of course.
a negotiating point between countries and companies too. So just
Yep.
can we revisit that again? I know we're running out of time, so I just want to kind of hit this last point. So could you comment again about what you would recommend companies to do considering the international expansion in 2025 and 2026?
Yeah, I think based on the available data, and I look at that a lot for the biweekly newsletter, there have been a bunch of studies and reports that, believe it or not, have come out in the last week. I can't believe everybody has a report. What's going to happen? What Canada has said, and admittedly wild prognostications. I believe that the global business landscape is going to experience considerable volatility and complexity, but it's going to also give us new opportunities. And the companies can adapt by revising strategies, maintaining flexible supply chains, like we talked about before, keeping agile about how to deal with the challenges and opportunities. My bottom line is what I tell people I work with: keep up to date on what's happening in the countries and regions you want to do business and be prepared to be flexible.
Yes, so have a plan B.
Or C and D also.
And C and D. Yes, good piece of advice for all of us in our living.
It's time to update your strategic plan.
Yes, absolutely. So let's bring it all home. What does this all mean for us here in the United States?
Well, it's too early to, and I'm not trying to not answer the questions. It's still too early. Yeah. We heard a lot of things during the campaign. Now we have to see how those translate into policy. But really, it is the policy that's going to determine how this country works globally, how easy or difficult it is going to be to do business here and other places. We got to keep listening and watch the appointments. That's one of my big things, is watch who gets appointed, because they're going to be, they may be very different than the people that held the job before. And hopefully by January 20th, we'll have some defined policies we can then use to do business. I think we will.
Good words of advice. So we will keep our ear to the ground and
watch and listen. Watch and listen.
Watch and listen.
And don't make any on business right now. Just, you got the end of the year coming. It's holiday time. Yes. Kind of take it easy. Let things develop. Now, some people may say that's not the right way to go, and that's fine, but I like to do business based on information.
Well,
and so we don't have that information right now, but we do know certain.
We have some instability here. So let's see.
Well, I think that's everywhere. Okay. We had those elections this year. Some were in countries like the Russian one, which was a sham, of course. I think he only got 94%. He's down 6% from the last time he rigged the elections in Russia. But we had a change in the UK from conservative to Labour, whereas here we had from Labour to conservative, and those changes elections have consequences.
Right, they do.
But in the UK, my friends are already figuring out how to deal with it. I say, well, okay, this is going to be the policy. There they know the policy. And now we're going to figure out how to make it work.
Fantastic.
That's what we do.
Yes, so Bill, so you
Not,
mentioned, and I want to invite our audience to also subscribe to Bill's newsletter. So Bill, can you talk about your newsletter? And I want them to, and give them how they can access your global
well,
newsletter.
they can go to our website, which is edwardsglobal.com. And in there, if you look at our publications, you'll see the name of the newsletter is GeoWizard. And I don't have time to tell you what that means, but you can sign up for it. It comes out every other Tuesday. It came out this week. And it really deals with what's going on in the world. And it's a unique look because it's mostly graphs and charts that we find in articles around the world. We subscribe to 40 different publications, and we monitor those on a daily basis and then pick out things that are interesting, countries and, general studies. And as I said, in the last week, almost every big think tank has come out with a report. How they came up with it in that short a time, I don't know, but they have. And we look for graphs because humans don't read a lot of words, right? But they look at graphs. So if you you can go directly to geowizard.biz, but if you want to sign up, you can see, we did the 121st one. It started in March of 2020. Now, what happened in March of 2020, Linnea? We couldn't go into other countries. And so the companies we're working with said, what's going on in other places? And we have a network of people that work for us overseas, and they started telling us. And I thought it would go on for a couple of months, and we just did the 121st biweekly one. Never thought it would happen.
And haven't looked back, right? That's valuable information. And I must also say, besides the 40 or so world-class subscriptions that you curate and report on, you also have people in other countries.
In over 20 countries that tell us what's going on the ground. And it's not always what you read. Believe it or not, it's not always what you see on the mainstream news. So that's hard to believe, but it may be different.
No, interesting. I think that's a really valuable piece of information. I encourage all of you interested.
That's very nice of you.
Oh, yes.
It's free.
It's free. And to reach out to Bill with questions, and especially if you have a business that is interested in going overseas.
Yeah, or if you have something to contribute on something that's going on in a country, please let me know, because we get contributors.
Yes, all the time.
We have a couple of contributors for China who are Western but speak and read the language that tell us what's going on, and allows us to put articles in that are not always in English, but we got the English version of it.
Yes, fantastic. So, Bill, you are a rare human being. It's been a total pleasure to have you on.
Well, that's very nice words you say. I'm just old. I've been around a long time.
And your experiences show, and your humanity shows. And I just want to let you know I really appreciate being one of your friends and being
likewise.
Colleagues.
Likewise. I've been lucky with friends. Thank you all for listening. And by the way, it's probably worth what they paid for it. But the bottom line is things are going to change.
Yeah.
And so we need to be flexible.
Yes.
Not a bad thing, just a change.
Not a bad thing at all. Okay,
thank you very much for allowing me to be on your podcast. I'm just so honored.
Well, as what a treat it is to have you here today, Bill. Yes, it was fun. Everyone, so we're going to sign off now, and do tune in next Wednesday. We'll have another guest who will talk to us about their area of specialization. But today we were really treated to a global, worldwide tour through Bill's eyes.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you, and bye for now.